There's a kind of silence that creeps in when you're alone. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that feels like something has been lost. Something essential. You sit with it in your room, your car, your thoughts, and it follows you. It's not depression, not exactly. It's not sadness either. It's the sense that you are living a life that was never really yours. A life tailored by expectations you never agreed to shape, by a culture you never questioned and kept alive, by a quiet, desperate need to belong. Since childhood, you've been trained not taught, but trained to fit. Fitting in meant survival. At school, at home, even among so-called friends. You learned to smile when you didn't want to agree, when your gut twisted in protest. You learned to speak their language, to adopt their customs, to dull your thoughts until they were acceptable, inoffensive. And slowly, the quiet miracle that is your inner world, your real self, was buried under layers of masks. Each one praised, each one encouraged, each one rewarded. But there comes a moment, subtle often, unnoticed, when something inside you revolts. It doesn't scream. It doesn't break things. It just detaches. You find yourself drifting. Your laughter feels mechanical. Your conversations hollow. You play the roles you were given, the good student, the agreeable friend, the high performer. But the soul inside those roles is missing. And late at night, when the noise stops, the masks slip. You ask yourself questions you can't voice out loud. Who am I beneath all this? Why does it feel like I'm pretending even around the people who claim to know me best? Carl Jung called it the persona, the social face we wear to meet the world. It's not evil. It's necessary. But the danger lies in forgetting that it's not you. The danger is mistaking the shell for the soul. Jung warned that the more we identify with our mask, the more distant we become from our unconscious, the place where our true self waits, buried beneath years of social performance. And the price of this distance, numbness, meaninglessness, a chronic hunger for something real, something felt. You were not born to fit in. You were born to awaken, to remember what you were before the world told you who to be. Individuation is not a motivational slogan. It's a spiritual ordeal. It means stripping away everything false, even the parts of you that are praised and admired. It means confronting the frightening truth that you are not who you thought you were and never were. It means stepping away from the crowd and into the abyss of your own psyche, alone, unsure, unapproved. This is not rebellion. This is reclamation. Think back. There was a time long before shame entered your system when you were vividly, painfully alive. As a child, you were eccentric, strange, wild. You played without purpose, cried without censorship. You had imaginary worlds that made more sense than the adult world ever could. You spoke truths too raw for others to hear, and slowly they taught you to stop, to regulate, to shrink. You learned to hide the parts of you that didn't fit the model, and you became a stranger to yourself in the process. But here's the cruel irony: the more you tried to fit in, the more isolated you became. Because connection built on conformity is not connection at all. It's mutual performance. It's two masks shaking hands, not two souls meeting. You become surrounded by people and still feel alone. You follow the rules, succeed by the standards, and yet something in you mourns not loudly, but deeply. Schopenhauer once wrote that most people take the limits of their vision to be the limits of the world. But what if the world you've been shown, the scripts, the systems, the roles, is a prison disguised as a playground? What if the life you've been trying to succeed in was never designed for you to be whole? What if success in this world is failure to your soul? When you ask yourself, why do I feel like something is missing? It's not because you failed. It's because something real is trying to wake up. The part of you that cannot be soothed by praise or status or validation. The part of you that was never meant to conform, only to become. You were not born to be understood by everyone. You were not born to fit the mold. You were born to take the terrifying path back to yourself. And it will cost you everything that isn't real. That feeling, that quiet, aching feeling that you've outgrown your own life, is not a weakness. It's the first breath of your real self rising to the surface. And once that breath is taken, you cannot go back. Not truly. You can pretend. You can try. But the knowing is there now. The split has begun. And something deeper is calling. Not to rebel, but to return. There is a kind of betrayal that doesn't come from others. It comes from within, a quiet betrayal of your own truth. You feel it in moments you can't explain, like when you're praised for something you don't even believe in. When you're surrounded by people and still feel unseen. When you're smiling, but something in your chest refuses to echo the expression. That is the war between the persona and the soul, between the mask you've mastered and the self you've silenced. Most people don't even notice it. They call it stress, boredom, anxiety. But if you listen closely, if you sit in that ache without distraction, you'll realize it's something older, something sacred. It is the cry of the self refusing to die quietly beneath a life of imitation. Jung called this the beginning of the descent and the first step toward individuation. It's the moment you realize that your suffering isn't random. It's purposeful, not comfortable, not safe, but purposeful. Because the pain you feel isn't a flaw. It's a signal. Something inside you is waking up, and it doesn't want applause, it wants authenticity. You can feel it in the way your dreams change, in the way your favorite distractions start to lose their flavor. What once entertained you now bores you. What once gave you pride now feels hollow. And worst of all, the image of yourself you once clung to now feels like a cage. A well-decorated, socially approved cage. But a cage nonetheless. This is where most people stop. This is where they turn back. Because to go forward means to dismantle everything you've called me. Your name, your job, your personality traits, even your goals. Most of them weren't chosen. They were inherited, copied, programmed. And now they're dissolving, leaving you in a psychological free fall. This is the abyss Nietzsche spoke of, the place where the ego dies, where the ground beneath your identity crumbles, and all that remains is the question, who am I really? This is not a comfortable question. It is not a branding exercise or a self-help prompt. It is an existential earthquake. Because the answer doesn't come in words. It comes in death. The death of illusions. The death of borrowed identities. The death of needing to be liked, understood, or admired. And once these die, the silence left behind can feel unbearable. You feel like nothing, like no one. You grieve a version of yourself that never really existed. But this is necessary. Jung wrote, "In each of us there is another whom we do not know, and that stranger, that silent witness beneath the noise is your real self. Not your ego, not your roles, not your reputation, but the you that existed before you were shaped to fit. This inner stranger is not always pleasant. It's not the glossy version of you that the world wants. It's raw, animal, mythic. It carries both your deepest potential and your darkest fears. It holds the repressed anger, the forbidden desire, the wild creativity you were told to suppress. It is the shadow, the lost twin of your personality. And it does not rise gently. It rises through breakdowns, through painful honesty, through dreams that disturb you, through emotions that don't make sense until you stop trying to make them palatable. This is not dysfunction. It is metamorphosis. The cocoon does not open politely. It splits. And what emerges is not the old self improved, but the false self destroyed. Adler once said that every individual's problem is a problem of courage. The courage to be disliked, to be misunderstood, to be real. And this courage is not loud. It's not the courage of heroes or rebels. It's the quiet, trembling choice to say, I don't know who I am, but I refuse to keep lying about it. It's the decision to sit with your confusion, your rage, your longing, and not try to sanitize it for others' comfort. It's the willingness to descend, to go inward, to lose the applause of the world in exchange for the truth of your soul. You begin to notice strange things. Certain people no longer feel safe. Certain habits no longer numb the pain. Certain ambitions begin to feel foreign, like someone else's dream sewn onto your skin. And then comes the rage. Not at others, but at yourself for staying asleep so long, for playing along, for betraying the one person you were born to protect your own psyche. But even this rage is sacred. It is the fire that burns the mask. It is the forge in which your real voice is reborn. No one tells you that awakening feels like dying, that before you become who you truly are, you must pass through everything you are not. You must question what you were told is good and successful and normal. You must violate the scripts handed to you by unconscious parents, teachers, friends, not out of rebellion, but out of necessity. Because to become yourself is to commit a psychological heresy. It is to step outside the church of conformity and speak with your own tongue, even if it trembles. Individuation is not a path you walk, it is a path you are. It grows beneath your feet only as you dare to move forward. And there will be no applause, no guidebook, only the compass of your own discomfort, your own intuition, your own ache for something more real than acceptance. You are not here to be easily categorized or endlessly understood. You are here to break the pattern, to embody the myth your ancestors only dreamed of, to resurrect the parts of you that were buried alive, and to carry them forward not as shame, but as power. You are not meant to fit in. You are meant to wake up. There is a stretch of inner wilderness that no one prepares you for. It comes after the mask is shattered, but before the true self has fully emerged. You are no longer who you were, but not yet who you are meant to be. This is the in-between, the desert of becoming, and it is one of the most psychologically excruciating phases of life. There are no signs here, no validation, no clear direction, just silence, uncertainty, and the haunting suspicion that maybe, just maybe, you've made a mistake by leaving the known world behind. But this feeling is a lie. It is the final test of the false self clawing to survive. The ego, once so proud and polished, now whispers doubts. It tells you to turn back, to return to the familiar, to abandon this descent. But you can't. Not really. Because some part of you, even if only a sliver, has seen something, felt something, tasted something real. And that glimpse, however fleeting, has ruined you for ordinary life. Most people do not pass through this desert. They retreat. They medicate it, intellectualize it, avoid it through distraction. But if you stay, if you endure, something ancient begins to move beneath the surface. A new kind of self begins to form, not through effort, but through surrender. You begin to see how much of your suffering came not from being broken, but from being false. The striving, the pretending, the endless game of comparison. all of it fueled by a desperate need to prove your worth to a world that was never qualified to measure it. And here, in the quiet, that need begins to die. It doesn't happen all at once. It dissolves slowly like fog retreating at dawn. You start to want different things. Not louder things, not shinier things, but deeper things, honest things. Things that don't impress anyone but feel right in your bones. This is where your archetypes begin to stir, not as characters or roles, but as forces, psychic currents that were always in you, waiting for your permission to awaken. The warrior, the sage, the outcast, the creator. These are not fantasies. They are blueprints of human potential, embedded in your unconscious, shaped by generations of survival, transformation, and myth. Jung believed that these archetypes are the foundation of our individuation process, not identities to wear, but energies to integrate. When you connect with them, something strange happens. You no longer need permission to be yourself. You become self-originating, self-validating. You begin to feel, perhaps for the first time, what it means to be internally anchored. But there is a price for this rebirth. You must confront the shadows that guard these archetypes. For every warrior there is rage you must own. For every sage an arrogance you must humble. For every creator a fear of failure you must befriend. The outcast demands you make peace with rejection, even exile. This is the sacred violence of individuation and the psychological cutting away of all that is not essential. It hurts. It isolates. It unravels you. But it also clarifies. It strips you down until only what is real remains. Nietzsche said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." Your why begins to crystallize here, not as a goal or mission, but as a presence. You start to feel your life not as something you manage, but something you embody. You speak less, but say more. You do less, but feel more. Your values shift from performance to presence, from achievement to alignment. And the world, which once seemed like a place to conquer, now feels like a mirror, constantly reflecting the level of truth you are willing to live by. In this stage, you lose people. People who were attached to your mask, not your essence. They may not understand. They may call you cold, distant, changed. Let them. This is the grief that comes with self-possession. Not because you pushed them away, but because your evolution threatens their comfort. You will be misunderstood. You will be judged, but you will also be free. And that freedom is not the shallow kind sold by society. It's the sacred kind earned in the furnace of inner death and rebirth. There is still fear. Of course there is. But it no longer controls you, because you have seen what happens when you live a lie, and you have tasted, even in brief moments, the terrifying beauty of truth. You've begun to choose solitude over approval, depth over distraction. And while the world may not reward this path, your soul does. It begins to breathe again, to speak again. And the language it speaks is not English or praise or metrics. It is instinct, intuition, silence, energy. You learn to trust this inner compass more than any external authority. And it never lies to you, even when it leads you into the unknown. This is the real beginning of individuation. Not the breaking down, but the building. The slow, deliberate crafting of a life that reflects your soul, not your survival strategy. A life rooted in truth, no matter how costly. Because by now you understand the deeper cost, the cost of betraying yourself, just to fit in. And that is a price you are no longer willing to pay. Eventually, you stop searching for the version of yourself that others will love. You stop auditioning for belonging, stop bargaining with your own soul for scraps of approval. Not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. Because once you have touched what is real within you, everything else becomes noise. You learn to sit with yourself not as a problem to fix, but as a presence to honor. You begin to carry your own essence the way one carries fire, carefully, fiercely, unapologetically, and it changes how you move through the world. You no longer chase recognition. You no longer explain your transformation. You let go of the need to be understood because you finally understand yourself. This is not arrogance. It's not detachment. It's a quiet reckoning, the realization that fitting in was never the goal. The goal was to become whole. And wholeness often requires you to walk alone, to stand where others kneel, to speak truths that make the room uncomfortable. There will be times when you miss the comfort of ignorance, when you envy the ease with which others seem to exist within the roles they've been given. You will remember the simpler days, the praise, the belonging, the temporary highs of conformity. But then you'll remember the price, the ache, the numbness, the quiet knowing that you were never truly there. You'll remember the way you laughed without feeling, the way you agreed without believing, and you will know deep in your bones that no amount of comfort is worth that kind of self-abandonment again. Because once you've tasted your own truth, no imitation will ever satisfy you. Individuation is not just about becoming different. It's about becoming real. It's about embodying the person you were before the world taught you to fracture yourself into pieces. It's about integrating those pieces, the wounded child, the hidden artist, the silenced rebel, the forgotten mystic, into a single sovereign presence. Carl Jung warned that this path is not for the faint of heart. He said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." And yet, he also made clear that those who walk it do not do so out of choice, they do so because their soul demands it. Because to ignore the call is to slowly die, while appearing to live. To betray yourself in favor of acceptance is to vanish in plain sight. And so you press forward not because you are fearless, but because you are finished with the lie. You begin to live in alignment, not perfection. You allow yourself to be both light and shadow chaos, and form wild and wise. You stop trying to fix your contradictions and start honoring them. Because you are no longer seeking to be a polished idea, you are becoming a living truth. And the world slowly begins to reflect this shift. You begin to attract not crowds, but kin, not followers, but mirrors. People who see you not as a role, but as a presence. People who don't need you to shrink, dilute, or translate yourself to be accepted. These are rare, but they are real. They are not drawn to your mask, but to your essence. And in their presence, you remember that belonging was never supposed to cost your becoming. That connection doesn't require compromise, only clarity. That love, when it is true, will never ask you to erase yourself. Still you carry grief. Grief for the years spent asleep. Grief for the versions of you that had to die. Grief for the people you lost along the way, not because they were bad, but because they were tied to your illusion. But this grief is holy. It is proof that you have lived, that you have shed what was false and walked through the fire of your own becoming. And what remains now is not perfection, not certainty, but presence. The ability to stand in your own skin without apology, to speak your truth without permission, to walk your path without consensus. This is the silent triumph of individuation. It is not loud, it is not marketable. It is not even visible to the untrained eye. But it is felt, deeply, in the way you move, in the way you choose, in the way you no longer reach outside yourself for identity. You are no longer acting. You are being. And that being is not the result of self-improvement. It is the revelation of what was always there, hidden beneath the noise, waiting to be remembered. So if you are in that place, the in-between, the breaking the ache, know this: you are not lost. You are being forged. You are not broken. You are being revealed. You were not born to fit in. You were born to awaken, to shatter the mask, to walk the unknown, to meet yourself in the fire, and to return not with answers but with truth, not as someone else, but as you, whole, undeniable, free. The mirror effect: why people project their wounds onto you. There's something quietly disorienting about being misunderstood, not because your words were unclear, but because someone saw something in you that was never yours to carry. A mood, an accusation, a tension in their eyes that didn't belong to the present moment. You walk away wondering what you did wrong, replaying every interaction, trying to decode their shift in tone, their sudden distance. But the truth is more disturbing. It wasn't you they were reacting to. It was a wound in them, a buried emotion, a forgotten version of themselves that your presence unknowingly awakened. You became the mirror, and for that they punished you. Most people live with an unconscious storm swirling beneath their surface. A storm made of suppressed memories, unlived truths, rejected emotions, all pushed out of awareness in order to function. Carl Jung called this the shadow, the parts of ourselves we disown because they threaten the image we need to maintain. These aren't just negative traits like anger or envy. They can be anything we've learned to repress: sensitivity, ambition, sexuality, vulnerability. And when these disowned parts remain unintegrated, they don't disappear. They project, not quietly, not consciously, but violently onto others. This is the mirror effect. And it's not poetic metaphor, it's psychological fact. When someone carries unresolved pain, and you reflect an aspect of that pain, not by intention, but simply by being, they often cannot see you as you are. They see you as the container for their own chaos. You become the villain in their story, the trigger for their unresolved grief, the face of their rejected self. They project because they cannot yet hold what lives in them. And when that happens, the relationship becomes a distortion. You are not being related to, you are being used. Used as a screen for unconscious content. You've likely felt this in subtle and not-so-subtle ways. A friend grows cold after you succeed at something they gave up on. A parent criticizes your emotional sensitivity because they were never allowed to feel. A stranger's hostility seems disproportionate to the moment. In these encounters, it's tempting to internalize the judgment, to believe that something is wrong with you. But if you look deeper, you'll see the fracture isn't in you, it's in them. You simply touched the fault line. And what cracked open wasn't anger at you, but grief in them. Projection is the unconscious attempt to escape oneself. And yet, ironically, it reveals more about the projector than the projected. Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote, "Whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process he does not become a monster." When people project their wounds onto others, they often do so under the illusion of moral clarity. They believe they are defending themselves, protecting boundaries, speaking truth, but often they are simply reliving an internal war externally. They're fighting a ghost with your face. This becomes especially dangerous when you are someone who feels deeply. Sensitive people, introspective, emotionally aware, attuned to subtle energies, often become projection targets. Why? Because they reflect more. They mirror back what others are unwilling to face. Their presence alone destabilizes the carefully constructed identities of those around them. Not because they're doing anything aggressive, but because truth, even when silent, is threatening. And if you embody even a sliver of that truth through your honesty, your calm, your refusal to play roles, you will activate the unconscious defense mechanisms of those still trapped in the performance. This is why many emotionally awake people find themselves repeatedly cast in roles that don't make sense. The difficult one, the arrogant one, the too much, the too sensitive, the not enough. These labels rarely describe the actual person. They describe the reaction of someone whose ego was unsettled by the mirror being held up. And the tragedy is that the more you try to correct the misunderstanding, to prove your intentions, to explain yourself, the deeper the projection locks in. Because projection isn't cured through facts. It's protected by defense. And until the person is ready to meet their own wound, they will cling to the image they've cast onto you because it spares them from having to feel their own shame. And yet, even knowing all this, it still hurts. Being projected onto is not just a philosophical curiosity. It's a kind of emotional violence. You feel erased, twisted, trapped in someone else's unconscious narrative. And if you don't recognize what's happening, you can spend years trying to fix a distortion that was never yours to carry. You start to silence parts of yourself to avoid triggering others. You walk on eggshells. You lose your center. And slowly your life becomes a reaction to other people's unhealed pain. But there is another path, a quieter one. It begins not in fighting projection, but in recognizing it, in seeing the mirror for what it is, a tool of awakening. Not just for them, but for you. Because every time someone projects onto you, you are being asked a question: will you collapse into their story? Or will you remain in your center, clear in your truth, and let their illusion fall apart on its own? When someone projects their wounds onto you, the most dangerous response is not anger, it is doubt. Doubt that maybe they're right. Maybe you are selfish. Maybe you are too much. Maybe you're the cause of their discomfort. And this doubt, subtle as smoke, begins to curl around your sense of self. You start to contort, not to deceive, but to survive. You begin managing their emotions, shrinking your truth, editing your presence, to avoid reactivating their pain. And without realizing it, you take responsibility for what isn't yours. You begin to carry their shame as if it were your own. This is how projection becomes possession, when the image they throw at you is internalized as a part of your identity. And this is the real cost of unconscious projection, not that people see you falsely, but that you begin to believe the lie they cast upon you. Carl Jung warned us about this psychic contamination. He wrote that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But what happens when only one of you is conscious of the reaction? When the other cannot see the storm they're externalizing, and you are the one who absorbs it. If you are not anchored in your own self-awareness, you become a container for someone else's pain. You feel their grief without clarity, their anger without context, their discomfort as your own flaw. And this is how people lose themselves, not in one dramatic moment, but slowly through 1,000 emotional compromises made in the name of keeping peace. Projection thrives in environments where silence is rewarded, where confrontation is feared, where honesty is mistaken for cruelty. And so the sensitive, intuitive soul often learns to self-abandon. Not because they are weak, but because they have been conditioned to believe that harmony is more important than truth. But real harmony, the kind that heals, can only exist between people willing to see their own shadows. Anything less is performance. Agreement at the cost of authenticity. peace built on suppression. And this is not love. This is quiet self-erasure. You have to ask yourself, whose wound am I carrying? Whose judgment have I confused with truth? Whose shame lives in my body inherited not through choice, but through unconscious loyalty? Because the tragic reality is, this many of us carry the emotional burdens of people who never learned to carry their own. We inherit unresolved patterns from parents who never looked inward. We become the scapegoats in social groups that fear depth. We are cast as the villain by partners who cannot face their own betrayals. And unless we stop, unless we recognize the pattern and name it for what it is, we live a life shaped not by who we are, but by who others need us to be, so they can avoid themselves. This is the danger of being a mirror. Your very existence can become threatening, not because you are aggressive, but because you are reflective. You show people the parts of themselves they've buried. You ask unspoken questions with your presence alone. And when they cannot face those questions, they unconsciously try to silence the source. They do this with judgment, with withdrawal, with aggression disguised as righteousness. But make no mistake, it's not really about you. It's about what you awaken. Jung said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But most people don't want that understanding. It requires too much. It requires the dismantling of narratives, the confrontation of childhood wounds, the admission of imperfection. So instead of going inward, they lash outward. They distort, they accuse, they isolate. And in doing so, they protect their image, but sacrifice their truth. You cannot save someone from this. You cannot explain them into awakening. You can only choose not to participate in the fiction. And that choice to not take on what isn't yours is an act of spiritual defiance. It says, I will not disappear just to soothe your shadow. It says, I see you projecting, and I refuse to agree with the distortion. It says, you may not understand me, but I will not contort myself to remain digestible. This choice is hard. It often comes with loss. But what you lose is never real connection. It's the illusion of safety in being misunderstood. What you gain is yourself. And this is the beginning of psychological sovereignty. You stop explaining your essence to people committed to misperceiving you. You stop apologizing for truths that make others uncomfortable. You stop negotiating your integrity for temporary belonging. And in that space, something sacred returns your center. Your clarity, your voice, not loud, not defensive, but unshakable. You realize that you are not here to be seen clearly by everyone. You are here to see yourself clearly and to live in accordance with that vision, no matter how many projections try to cloud it. There comes a moment in this path when you no longer need to be protected from projection, because you've learned to recognize it in real time. You feel it in the tone, in the tension, in the sudden shift in someone's eyes when they stop relating to you and begin relating to a wound you never caused. You stop asking, what did I do wrong? And begin wondering, what part of them did my presence disturb? This isn't arrogance, it's clarity. You start to see that the emotional reactions people have to you are often not about truth, but about memory. You're not speaking with a person, you're speaking with their unresolved past. And your only real task in that moment is to stay rooted, not to fix it, not to argue, not to collapse into their emotional weather, but to remain calm, clear, unmoved. This is what it means to be a mirror without absorbing the wound, to reflect what is unconscious in others without becoming entangled in their defense against it. Most people who project are not malicious. They are afraid. Their accusations are protections. Their criticism is camouflage. And if you take it personally, you make it personal, you descend into the very distortion you've been called to hold with awareness. But if you can stay centered, if you can remain in your body, in your breath, in your knowing, then something extraordinary happens. You become the silent invitation for transformation. Not because you explain the truth to them, but because you embody it. You no longer meet their shadow with your own. You meet it with presence. This is where the work of individuation becomes a living reality. Jung did not speak of wholeness as perfection. He spoke of it as integration, the ability to hold opposites within the self without being split by them. When you are projected onto, you are being offered a choice: collapse into the old role or embody the integrated self. And that self does not need to be liked to remain kind. It does not need to be understood to remain honest. It does not need agreement to remain whole. It simply is rooted, alive, aware. The more you walk this path, the more you realize how much of your suffering came not from being projected onto, but from trying to correct the projection. From begging people to see you clearly, instead of letting their misunderstanding reveal the limits of their own vision. This is the essence of emotional maturity, the ability to witness another's pain without making it your identity. To offer compassion without losing boundaries. To remain open without being invaded. This is not detachment. It's not indifference. It's sacred containment. It's the understanding that you are not the healer of everyone's wound, and you are not the enemy in everyone's story. You are only responsible for one thing: your own clarity. And clarity, when embodied fully, becomes medicine. Not the kind that forces others to change, but the kind that makes change possible through the quiet mirror of presence. The more you live this truth, the more projection becomes obvious. You see how often people are not speaking to you, but to a version of themselves that's still in pain. You watch them reach into their unconscious, pull out a story, and paste it onto your face. And instead of fighting back, you observe. You listen without absorbing. You stay kind without surrendering your truth. And in doing so, you create something rare. A space where projection is seen, but not empowered, where reaction is met with awareness, and where the cycle can end, not through resistance, but through reflection. And yes, there will be people who walk away, who cannot or will not see clearly, who need you to play the role they've cast you in, to protect their own identity. Let them. Their departure is not rejection, it is release. It is life removing what cannot resonate with your clarity. And though it hurts, it is also sacred. Because with every projection you no longer internalize, you reclaim another piece of your soul. You remember that your worth is not up for negotiation, and your truth does not need translation to be valid. You stop shrinking to fit into stories that were never yours to begin with. This is the paradox of healing. The more whole you become, the more clearly you see who cannot meet you there. And that clarity is painful, but it is also liberation. You are no longer the character in other people's unhealed scripts. You are the author of your own. And in the silence that follows, in the emptiness left behind by false roles and fading projections, something begins to bloom. A sense of self that is not dependent on how you are seen, but on how deeply you see. Not only yourself, but others, even those who project with compassion, distance, and unshakable clarity. At the end of it all, the greatest act of defiance is not confrontation, it is refusal. Not a loud theatrical resistance, but a silent, immovable truth held without apology. You begin to live in a way that does not depend on being seen accurately by others. You stop pleading to be understood because you understand that misunderstanding is not a failure of communication, it is often a defense mechanism in those who are not ready to face themselves. You become less reactive not because you no longer feel, but because you no longer hand over your inner world to those who haven't earned access to it. You recognize the quiet power of not accepting the roles people try to give you. You no longer perform for those still lost in their own projection. And this is what makes you dangerous, not your rage, not your rebellion, but your refusal to accept the distortion as your identity. You become untouchable, not because you are closed, but because you are no longer open to lies. Carl Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." And that is what you are now doing, not only in yourself, but in every interaction. You are watching the darkness rise in others not to judge it, but to understand the mirror they cannot yet face. You no longer confuse clarity with cruelty. You no longer see silence as weakness. You know now that the strongest boundaries are not built from defense, but from presence. From the steady, grounded, quiet certainty that says, "I know who I am, and I will not carry what is not mine." As this inner stance deepens, you begin to move through the world differently. You see the patterns before they entangle you. You hear the subtext beneath the accusations. You feel the emotional undercurrent long before it erupts. And you no longer take the bait. You no longer contort yourself to remain acceptable. You no longer become the villain in someone else's story just to preserve the illusion of peace. You hold your shape. You stay intact. And in doing so, you become a new kind of mirror, one that reflects not only others' wounds, but also their potential. Not because you teach them directly, but because your existence becomes a quiet challenge to their denial. You show without trying what it looks like to live without masks. And that in itself is a form of truth-telling. But truth is lonely, and clarity comes at a cost. You will lose connections that were based on illusion. You will walk away from people you once loved, not because you stopped caring, but because the relationship demanded that you betray yourself to stay. You will sit in moments of silence, so complete, so confronting, that it feels like exile. And in that silence, you will be asked the hardest question of all. Will you trade your soul for the comfort of being seen falsely? Or will you remain loyal to what is real, even if it means being misunderstood forever? This is the reckoning. The point where all the psychological theory, all the insight, all the clarity collapses into one simple, excruciating choice: yourself or your mask. And if you choose yourself, really choose it, then everything that cannot meet you in that truth must fall away. That includes your own illusions, your own compensations, your own stories about who you had to be to stay loved. The grief will come. Let it. The loneliness will ache. Feel it. But beneath it all, something steady begins to rise, the quiet certainty that you are no longer living someone else's life. You are no longer the mirror of their projection. You are now the reflection of your own integration. Your presence no longer provokes from chaos, but invites from clarity. You do not absorb, you reveal. You do not argue, you witness. You do not inherit, you release. And in that release, you become free, not in the loud, idealized sense of the word, but in the real, brutal, liberating way that only comes from refusing to carry another lie. So if you are there now in the confusion, in the collapse, in the quiet, after the storm of projection, know this: you are not breaking. You are finally seeing. You are not losing connection. You are creating space for real ones. You are not becoming cold. You are becoming clear. This is not the end of your story. This is the first page of the one you were always meant to write, the story that begins when you stop reflecting what is false and start embodying what is true. You are the mirror, But now you are also the light. And no projection, no distortion, no wound cast upon you can ever dim what you've reclaimed within. Your aura reveals. What words cannot the energetic signature of wholeness? There's a silence you carry long before you ever speak. A frequency, a weight, a subtle atmosphere that follows you into every room. Most people won't name it. Most won't even notice it consciously. But they feel it. They react to it. Sometimes with closeness. Sometimes with resistance. Sometimes with fear they can't explain. What they're responding to isn't your voice, your looks, or your behavior. It's your energy, your presence. What Jung might have called your psychic field and what ancient traditions called your aura. A word that's been cheapened by New Age cliches, but whose truth runs far deeper than surface mysticism. Your aura is not decoration. It is revelation. It tells the story of what you've faced, what you've hidden, what you've integrated, and what you haven't. It is the unspoken biography of your inner world, vibrating before you ever open your mouth. You can feel this difference in people, even if you don't have the language for it. One person enters a space and there's ease, warmth, gravity. Another enters and the air shifts. It tightens, contracts. You don't know why, but you know you felt it before, that split-second intuition that something is not congruent, that someone's words and their essence are not aligned. It's not about what they say. It's about what they are. Their aura is out of tune with itself. It's fractured, performative, holding together a fragile identity that hasn't been made whole. And your body knows. Because before your intellect interprets, your nervous system reads the room. The body listens to what the soul cannot ignore. Wholeness is not about perfection. It's about integration. And that integration has a frequency, a signature, a felt sense. People who have faced their inner fragmentation, who have descended into the unconscious, confronted their shadow, metabolized their wounds, carry a different kind of energy. There's nothing to prove, nothing to hide, nothing to dominate. Their aura is not a performance, it's an echo, the echo of someone who has stopped running from themselves. And that kind of presence cannot be faked. It cannot be imitated. Because it is the natural result of inner alignment when the conscious and unconscious mind are no longer at war. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." What he didn't say explicitly, but implied through all his work, is that the unconscious doesn't just operate through behavior. It radiates through energy. You can dress the part, say the right words, master the script of who you're supposed to be, but your aura will always betray your real state. You cannot fake wholeness. You cannot hide fragmentation, not from the body, not from the soul, and not from the rare people who have learned to see without using their eyes. This is why people who carry real inner peace often unsettle others. Their very presence is a mirror. And most people are not ready to look. Because when someone embodies wholeness, it confronts the parts of us that have not yet healed. We feel their clarity as a kind of pressure, their authenticity as a kind of threat. Not because they are trying to intimidate, but because our unintegrated parts don't know how to exist in the same field without becoming exposed. It's a spiritual discomfort, a psychic friction, and we project onto them. We call them arrogant, cold, too much, too intense, when in truth they are simply not willing to dilute their energy to protect our illusions. You may have felt this in yourself, the discomfort of being around someone who radiated something you couldn't name. You didn't know why they made you nervous, or why they felt magnetic, or why you wanted to be close but couldn't relax. The mind searched for reasons. But the body knew. Their energy spoke a language you hadn't yet learned. And that language wasn't built on charm or charisma. It was built on integration. You were feeling the signature of someone who had gone into the depths and returned whole. Someone who had faced their shame, their rage, their longing, and made peace with what they found. That peace created resonance. And that resonance activated your own fragmentation. Not as punishment, but as invitation. We live in a world obsessed with presentation, but starving for presence. A world that rewards appearances, but avoids essence. And yet, underneath every interaction, something deeper is always at play. People may not know why they trust you, or why they don't, why they open up to you, or why they pull away. But you can learn to feel it, to notice the subtle information encoded in the space between words, the energy that speaks louder than any voice. And once you learn to recognize it in others and in yourself, you realize how much of our suffering is rooted in energetic incongruence, in the gap between who we are and who we pretend to be. Wholeness begins where performance ends. And your aura, your energetic signature, is shaped not by how perfect you've become, but by how honestly you've met what's inside you. Have you faced the exiled parts of yourself? Or are you still performing the version you think others want? Your aura tells the truth even when your words do not. If you want to know who someone really is, stop listening to their words and start feeling their presence. Words are easy to dress up, easy to curate. But presence is honest. It leaks the truth. It reveals the structure of someone's inner life without them ever having to speak. This is why the most psychologically dangerous people are often the most verbally sophisticated. They can say all the right things. They can mimic depth. They can talk about healing awareness, empathy, but their aura betrays them. You feel the fracture beneath their charm, the performative smoothness of someone who has mastered how to appear whole without ever doing the work of becoming whole. And the body knows. It tightens. It scans for threat. It doesn't trust what the mind can't explain, because the nervous system remembers the difference between truth and performance, even when the intellect has been conditioned to ignore it. This is the subtle power of your aura. It is not mystical fluff. It is not reserved for the spiritually elite. It is a field of consciousness that holds the emotional residue of everything you've faced, everything you've denied, and everything you've integrated. It is the result of your psychological and energetic coherence, or the lack of it. And people can feel it. Even if they don't know how to name it, they know how to respond to it. They feel safer around you, or they feel threatened. They lean in, or they retreat. And their reaction is not about your personality. It's about your vibration, the frequency of your emotional truth. Carl Jung understood this long before energy fields became popular in contemporary discourse. He spoke of the human psyche not as a fixed identity, but as a dynamic system of opposites. Conscious and unconscious. Persona and shadow. Ego and self. He wrote that wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration of the contraries. That integration, when realized, produces something you can feel, a groundedness, a quiet presence, a field of energy that doesn't demand attention but commands respect. Not by force, but by resonance. Because someone who is internally united radiates a kind of calm gravity. They are not scattered. They are not leaking. They are not needing you to mirror back a false identity. They have become a mirror of their own. You can sense this energetic difference in 1,000 subtle ways. In the way someone enters a room. In the way they listen without flinching. In the way they hold silence without reaching for distraction. You notice that they do not rush to fill space. They do not collapse into anxiety when faced with emotion. They don't need to dominate, but they're also not afraid to take up space. Their aura has weight, not heaviness, but density. A kind of energetic integrity that can only be forged in the fire of self-confrontation. And it is this integrity that makes people trust them even without understanding why. But the same presence that draws some people in will repel others, especially those who are not ready to face themselves. Because the aura of wholeness is confrontational. It reflects. It does not perform. It does not adapt to make others comfortable. And that non-performance can feel like aggression to those who are still living in survival-based identity structures. They may say you're intimidating, arrogant, or aloof. But what they really mean is that your groundedness reveals their fragmentation. Your calmness destabilizes their chaos. Your inner coherence makes their inner conflict impossible to ignore. This is where discernment becomes essential. Not everyone deserves access to your energy. Not everyone is ready to stand in the field of someone who refuses to betray themselves. And you are not responsible for softening your presence to make others feel more comfortable with their unhealed parts. Your job is not to shrink. Your job is to radiate what you've earned through your own becoming. To be a living, breathing signal that says, it is possible to live without pretending. It is possible to embody wholeness. But this embodiment is not passive. It requires ruthless honesty. It requires the willingness to feel everything you've buried, to hold the parts of yourself that were rejected, to face the grief that comes with letting go of who you were trained to be. It requires you to stop outsourcing your self-worth to perception and to start rooting your value in presence. Because presence cannot be stolen, only surrendered. And when you claim it not with arrogance, but with quiet certainty, your aura changes. You stop trying to be impressive. You become real. And in a world addicted to illusion, there is nothing more powerful and nothing more dangerous than someone who is real. Wholeness does not make you louder. It makes you clearer. It doesn't amplify your identity. It dissolves what is false until only the essential remains. And that essence has a vibration. It's not a metaphor. It's not romanticism. It's the literal, energetic consequence of being emotionally integrated. You begin to move differently, speak differently, choose differently, and without trying, without even knowing it, you begin to shift the emotional atmosphere around you. People sense something they can't name. They feel seen in your presence or exposed, grounded or unsettled, because your frequency, your aura, speaks to something ancient in them, something beneath their defenses, something their intellect can't filter. This is the frequency of inner truth, and it cannot be manufactured. It is born only when you stop running from yourself. Most people don't realize how exhausting it is to maintain an incoherent aura. When your conscious intentions and your unconscious emotions are in conflict, your entire system is at war. You say yes when you mean no. You smile when you want to cry. You praise others while secretly resenting them. And every time you split from your truth to be liked, you leak energy. You lose coherence. You dim your own signal. Over time, this becomes chronic, a slow erosion of your presence. You become performative, hypervigilant, adapted. And people may like you more, but not because they feel your soul. They like the character you've become, the projection you've sustained. But deep down, you know something's wrong. You feel tired in ways you can't explain, anxious without reason, hollow after praise. And what you're really feeling is the cost of self-abandonment. Carl Jung taught that psychic health depends on inner unity, the reconciliation of opposites within, the masculine and feminine, the shadow and the light, the ego and the self. This inner reconciliation doesn't just bring emotional peace, it recalibrates your entire energetic field. You become aligned not just in thought, but in vibration. The mask dissolves. The performance ends. You begin to carry a presence that cannot be misread. And while not everyone will like it, no one will question that it's real. Because something in them recognizes it. The same way wild animals sense safety, the same way children know who to trust, your presence becomes a kind of unspoken language, direct, visceral, unmistakable. And this clarity begins to change your relationships. You notice who can meet you where you are, and who needs you to regress in order to stay connected. You begin to sense which conversations nourish you, and which ones fracture your peace. Not because of content, but because of energy. You realize how many of your past connections were built not on resonance, but on survival mutual wounds, bonding in disguise. And as your frequency shifts, those connections fall away. Not because you're better, not because you judge, but because you no longer vibrate at the level of fragmentation. You no longer need to be mirrored by the same dysfunction to feel belonging. You've outgrown the need to dim your light just to remain seen. But this clarity comes at a cost. It forces you into spaces of loneliness, silence, solitude. It removes the distractions, the noise, the false intimacy, and it asks you to remain fully in the field of your own presence, even when no one else can meet you there. This is the test of wholeness. Will you remain in your own frequency when it no longer guarantees validation? When your energy no longer fits the room? When your aura reveals truths others are not ready to face? Will you contract to be more palatable? Or will you continue to radiate gently, steadily, unflinchingly? You will be misunderstood. That is inevitable. You will be projected onto, romanticized, feared, rejected. But none of that is yours to hold. Your job is not to manage how others feel about your energy. Your job is to stay in integrity with it, to maintain the inner alignment that allows your aura to remain stable even in chaos, to embody the quiet power of someone who has made peace with their own shadow and therefore refuses to dance with projections. This is not superiority. It's stewardship. You become responsible for your presence in a new way. You become aware that your energy impacts others not because you're trying to influence, but because you're not hiding anymore. You've become visible, not in image, but in essence. This is the beginning of real spiritual maturity. Not the ability to talk about healing, but the willingness to embody it when it's inconvenient. Not the pursuit of high vibration, but the practice of energetic coherence. And from this place, you begin to walk through life differently. You enter rooms and feel the shifts. You speak less but communicate more. You stop convincing and start resonating. And your aura, shaped by every wound you've alchemized, becomes your signature. Unmistakable, uncompromising, unshakably real. Eventually, you stop trying to be understood because you realize that your energy speaks on your behalf. Not the energy you perform, but the one you embody when no one is watching. Your aura becomes the final language, a silent, untranslatable expression of your wholeness. It carries the history of your inner work, the integration of your shadow, the forgiveness of your younger selves. And those who have done the work will feel it instantly. They will not need explanations. They will not ask you to soften, to shrink, to make yourself more comfortable for their consumption. They will recognize you because they have met themselves in the same fire. And those who haven't, they will feel the difference too, but they may not welcome it. They may flinch. They may withdraw. They may project. But you will not follow them into confusion because you no longer negotiate with distortion. You don't argue with the lie. You just stop being available for it. Carl Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But he didn't mean identity in the surface sense. He meant essence, the self beneath the mask, the energy beneath the performance, the soul beneath the strategy. And when you live from this place, something fundamental changes. You stop performing alignment and begin radiating it. You stop manipulating your image and start protecting your frequency. You no longer walk into rooms wondering how you're being perceived. You walk in asking one quiet question. Am I still in truth? Because when your internal state is congruent with your external expression, there is nothing to prove, nothing to control, and nothing to fear. Your aura becomes a kind of shield, not from pain, but from falsehood, not from discomfort, but from distortion. And through it, you begin to attract not crowds, but resonance, not attention, but recognition. This path will ask everything from you. It will strip away the roles that won you, praise the masks that kept you safe, the identities that bought you belonging at the cost of your integrity. It will demand solitude discipline and the willingness to face every part of yourself that still seeks external validation. And at times, it will feel like you are losing everything. But what you are losing is not real connection, it's conditional proximity. Not love, but approval. Not truth, but comfort. And in its place, you are gaining something sacred: self-possession. Presence. A life that does not collapse when you are misunderstood, because it was never built on performance to begin with. You will reach a point where silence feels more honest than explanation, where your body's intuition becomes a more reliable compass than anyone's advice, where your energy walks into a room and says everything your mouth no longer needs to. And that is not arrogance. That is coherence. You have made peace with the noise inside you, so you are no longer pulled by the noise outside. You have integrated the parts of you that once cried out for approval, so now you walk with a quiet fullness that cannot be extracted. You have stopped outsourcing your wholeness, so your presence now carries the echo of truth, clear, grounded, unshakable. This is what it means to be whole, not to be perfect, not to be untouched by pain, but to be fully claimed by yourself. To walk into your life with all of you, not just the parts that others prefer. To carry an aura that is not clean, but real. Not polished, but alive. An aura that says, I have suffered, but I am here. An aura that reflects the work, the wounds, and the willingness to keep showing up anyway. That is the energetic signature of wholeness, not brilliance, not dominance, not enlightenment, but the steady pulse of someone who has nothing left to hide. So if you feel unseen but know you are true, keep going. If you feel misunderstood but cannot betray your frequency, stay with it. If your presence makes others uncomfortable but your spirit remains intact, trust that. Because energy never lies. And even if no one says it aloud, they feel you. They feel your truth. They feel your wholeness. And one day when the words have all failed, it will be your aura, not your story, not your argument, not your identity that speaks the loudest. And it will say simply and silently, I am. And that will be enough. Because wholeness is always enough, even when the world is not ready to receive it.